Today, we're diving into an idea that is so simple on the surface, but just gets wild when you look closer. Universal basic income. The promise is huge, basically ending poverty with a single check. But the math behind it? Well, that's where things get complicated. And we're talking trillion-dollar complicated.
So let's just boil it down to the big question right at the heart of it all. What if you got a paycheck every single month just for being you? No strings attached, no bureaucracy, just a basic income guaranteed. It's a radical thought, right? And that's exactly why so many people are fascinated by it.
Okay, so let's get really clear on what we're talking about here. Universal basic income. The magic is really in those first two words. Universal means everybody gets it. The billionaire and the person struggling to make rent, same check. And unconditional, that means you don't have to do anything to get it. No work requirements, no tests. It's a floor that no one can fall beneath.
Now, to really get why this idea is so exciting, you've got to look at the small-scale experiments, the pilots that have popped up all over the world. Because when you do, the results are, well, they're pretty amazing.
Okay, check this out. In Stockton, California, they gave a group of people $500 a month, no questions asked. And what happened? The rate of full-time employment for those people actually went up from 28% to a whopping 40% in just 1 year. So much for the idea that free money makes people lazy, right? It turns out that a little bit of stability actually helped them find better, more stable work.
And you know that other big criticism you always hear, that people will just waste the money? Well, the Stockton experiment just blew that idea right out of the water. Less than 1%, less than one, of the money was spent on things like alcohol or tobacco. The vast majority of it went exactly where you'd hope. Food, utilities, car repairs, the basics.
The benefits don't even stop at your wallet.
This is really fascinating. Way back in the 70s, a big experiment in Canada called Mincome found something incredible. The people receiving the basic income had an 8.5% drop in hospitalization rates. Think about that. Just by reducing financial stress, people were getting physically healthier. That's a huge deal. So when you pull back and look at all these different tests, from Finland to Kenya, Canada to the US, a pretty clear picture starts to emerge. People's stress levels and depression go down. Their overall well-being goes up. They spend the money wisely. And that big, scary fear that everyone's just going to quit their jobs and sit on the couch, it just doesn't happen in these experiments.
The evidence from the pilots seems so clear, right? Less stress, better health, more stability. It really begs the question, if this thing works so well in small doses, what's the holdup? Why aren't we all getting these checks in the mail? And this is where the simple promise crashes right into a giant brick wall of reality. Because what works for a few hundred people in one city is a completely different beast when you try to do it for an entire country. The real hurdle here is the absolutely mind-boggling math. There's this quote from one of our sources that just perfectly nails it. At scale, the math becomes the policy. In other words, once you start talking about millions of people and trillions of dollars, the numbers aren't just a detail anymore. The numbers are the whole story.
So just how big are these numbers? Let's talk about the US for a second. Even a pretty modest UBI, say $10,000 a year per person, would cost at a minimum over $3 trillion every single year. That's a 3 with 12 zeros after it. To really wrap your head around that, the entire US federal budget back in 2019 was around $4 trillion. So a $3 trillion UBI program isn't just another government expense. It's almost the size of the entire existing federal government. It's monumental. Okay, so you might be thinking, well, why not just pay for it by cutting other welfare programs? It's a common idea, but the math just doesn't add up, not even close. If you eliminated some of the biggest safety net programs we have, you'd only cover about 20% of the cost. You'd still need to find a way to fund the other 80%. And this isn't just a US problem. The scale of this is staggering everywhere. Take the UK, for example. One proposal there would cost nearly 4 times the entire budget for the National Health Service, the NHS. I mean, the NHS is practically a religion over there. A number like that is just a political non-starter. But, okay, let's just pretend for a second that we could find the money. The problems don't stop there, because when you're talking about a program this massive, you have to think about all the other things, the hidden costs and consequences. This gets us to a really important idea: opportunity cost. Every $1 trillion we spend on UBI is $1 trillion we can't spend on other huge priorities. We're talking about things like developing green energy, making college affordable, or curing diseases. It's a choice, and it's a massive one.
And here's the other crucial thing. Those small pilots, they just can't tell us what would happen to the whole economy. If everyone suddenly has more money, do landlords just jack up the rent everywhere? What happens to wages? How do you convince people to accept the massive tax hikes needed to pay for it? These are giant economy-wide questions that a small test just can't answer.
And then there's the messy reality of politics. Imagine building your life around this basic income, only to have it ripped away. That's exactly what happened in Ontario, Canada. They launched a big 3-year pilot, but just 17 months in, a new government got elected and canceled the whole thing, just like that. It shows how fragile a program this big can be. So all of this brings us to the real choice, the real dilemma at the heart of the UBI conversation. It's not really a simple yes or no. It's a much deeper question about the best way to help people when you have limited resources.
At the end of the day, it's a trade-off. On one hand, you have the universal approach of UBI. It's simple, there's no stigma, and nobody gets left out. But it's unbelievably expensive, and a lot of money goes to people who don't necessarily need it. On the other hand, you have targeted aid. It's way more cost-effective because you're focusing the money where it's needed most. The downside? It's more complicated, and sometimes people fall through the cracks.
So a lot of experts are now saying, hey, maybe it's not about one single giant program. Instead, they're talking about a policy stock. The idea is to layer several smarter, more targeted programs. Things like a guaranteed income just for the lowest earners, more support for working families, and just making basics like housing and healthcare cheaper for everyone. The goal is to get the same good outcomes as UBI, but for a fraction of the cost. And that's really what it all boils down to, isn't it? When we talk about building a better safety net, what are we really trying to do? Is the ultimate goal the beautiful simplicity of one check for every single person? Or is it about finding the most powerful, most efficient way to get the most help to the people who are truly struggling? That's the real trillion-dollar question.